I was kind of like, my hair was on fire. I was like, I have to do something. You know, I was almost hyperventilating, going, but this is terrible. And how come I didn't know about this? And then I looked around and I thought, well, from the way they're behaving, it seems like a lot of other people don't know about this stuff either. And so I desperately wanted to do something. But I was still just, recovering management consultant and wannabe writer.
I love that.
And so that wasn't a very compelling platform. And then I happened to make friends with this guy via the Royal Geographical Society in London. Make friends with this guy who had rowed across the Atlantic with, of all people, his mother.
Oh.
Welcome to the Habits to Goals podcast with Martin Grunburg. It's time to take control of your life. Are you ready to achieve goals faster and more consistently than ever before? You need the Habit Factor. You're listening to Habits to Goals, the podcast that helps you create the habits that lead to success. And here is Martin Grunburg.
All righty. Welcome back, Habits to Goals listeners. Thank you so much for joining me. We have an unbelievable episode in store for you. And you're probably thinking I say that all the time, but I got to tell you, I have hunted down, and I got to be careful when I say that, this woman maybe for years. There's a great background story. I'm sure we will get into how our worlds have collided, but I have, and I got to be careful how I say that, dragged Roz Savage into the studio. It's a gorgeous Southern California, San Diego Sunday, and here we are grinding, working hard on your behalf. So, Roz, how are you today?
It's a real pleasure to be here, Martin. I can't believe that we've been like in each other's orbit all these years, and this is the first time that we've actually met in person. It did sound a bit stalkerish, like the hunting me down and dragging me in here like by the hair. I do want you to know, dear listeners, that I am actually here of my own accord and very, very willingly.
That's beautiful. And I love your accent. I forget
I've been practicing for a long time.
How charming your accent is. So, Roz, as we kind of touched on earlier, and I know you're a fan of the show, so I know you know how we kick things off with what we call the Good Things Report, the GTR.
This could take the whole show.
Yeah. So the question is,
so many good things.
You can defer to me, or you can take it, and then we just exchange a couple good things.
Well, I suppose seeing as I've just arrived from an English winter, I do have to say the sunshine is definitely top of my list of good things today.
Awesome. How long were you in England?
Right,
you're always there.
Yes, I spent a lot of time in the US over the years, but now I'm based in Windsor, just outside of London, and just down the road from the Queen's got a little 500-room, 1,000-year-old castle up the street.
That's so fantastic.
It is.
Wow.
But it's 2018. It's a fantastic year so far. Apparently the year of the divine feminine, just so you know.
Wow.
And I'm
already... That's you.
I'm doing my bit,
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of good things happening. After, the last couple of years have been interesting on both sides of the Atlantic.
Sure.
But I'm feeling tremendously positive about this year. There are cool synchronicities and serendipities happening, which is always a good sign.
Wow.
It's like a little wink from the universe that somebody's in charge, despite appearances to the contrary.
Well, everything's a test.
Indeed.
Well, my GTR, I'm gonna break my own rule and hit you with two. The first is I did. And I feel like I might have shared this on another interview, but in a different sense. So occasionally I'll do my little speaking gigs, and we did one here in San Diego, Junto Global, which is, if you've heard of Junto, it's like, what has Benjamin Franklin not done? So look it up later, but it's an incredible forum group, and it may even have some relevance to what we were talking about before. So anyways, at the end of that, and I've done this before, but I throw out hey, one of the most valuable things that I've done is become a big brother, volunteer to, it's just a program we have in America. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The point is, the reason it's a GTR, so 20 years ago, my little was 10 and a half. Today he's 30.
How did that happen?
But I'm sharing this to this group because they're incredible young men mostly. And I'm just saying, if you're on the fence, reach out, let me know. And a couple guys did. So I think they're on the track to becoming big brothers. And I love that. So that's my GTR. The other, I let the cat out of the bag. So in a few days-ish, I turn a half century, which is so horrible. But some of my very best mates, my best buddies, took me to something I'd never do, which is Torrey Pines watch the pro golf tour. We had this VIP suite, all the food, all the drinks. So that was Friday. Good thing we weren't trying to do this yesterday. So,
can I just share something from the other side of 50?
Absolutely.
Because I turned 50 on the 23rd of December. Not a great date to have a birthday. Yay, thank you. And I gave myself the best birthday gift ever last year, which was to bring together 35 of my bestest girlfriends from around the world. And we rented a country house in the east of England. And we had, for a long weekend, a cross between a conference and a party and a sleepover. And it was when you bring together, I'm sure you get this with your male buddies, but when you bring together 35 really sort of engaged, passionate, smart women, just sparks fly, friendships are formed, support networks are woven. It was just absolutely brilliant. So even now I'm still riding high buzzing on that wave. Right. I'm still buzzing.
Well, that's fantastic. And I touched on it in the open. I'm going to give the reader/listener a bit of background. In the event you don't know, Roz is it's hard to encapsulate actually everything she does, but I want to, before I even get there, set the table. Almost like when I didn't know what she did or who she was, and it was either like a Google alert or somebody pointed out, but you had blogged about the habit factor, and you said something like, and at the end of the day, I check off my habits that are helping me get closer to my goals. And I love this lady. So I reach out to her, and then I'm reading about your background, and I'm just blown away. Like, wow, I cannot believe. So the short synopsis is, at the time, I believe you had rowed across the Pacific. Is that possible?
If I had done the Pacific, I would have done the Atlantic as well, because the Atlantic was my first one.
I think
just to clarify, like rowed as in with a W in it.
Yeah.
Like rowed in a rowboat.
Right, in a rowboat. ROWED.
Yes.
Right.
Some people are like, you rode your bicycle across an ocean?
No, not
that's RODE.
Yeah. Rode across the ocean. That's hopefully the Atlantic and the Pacific. But I think it was your first one. So you had just finished the Atlantic.
Yeah, I did the Atlantic in 2005 to 6.
Okay. And that was your first?
That was my first. Yes.
So, and I'm trying to think, because anyways, I don't want to bore the listener. The point is, because the book came out in like 2000. The app came out in 2009. So maybe it was the Pacific.
Well, the Pacific, I had a failed attempt in 2007.
But
long story.
No failure.
And then I had a learning experience in 2007. Right. And then 3 successful stages from San Francisco to Hawaii to Kiribati to Papua New Guinea in 2008, 9, and 10.
So this is the background. We're going to get into...
And don't forget the Indian Ocean, 2011.
No, we're not going to get... we're going to get into all of that. So ultimately, she ends up rowing with a W... Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. But my first meeting, greeting, and attraction was via the habit factor, which is so bizarre. So I have to share the story, because this is the Habits to Goals podcast, and I love bringing in incredibly interesting personalities, change makers like yourself, thought leaders. So that's a bit of the background, how we have met. And now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, so if that's 09, 010, we're here 8 years later. So our paths have kind of intersected over the years. And we were threatening to do this interview 2 or 3 years ago. And again, I've dragged her into the studio willingly, so to speak. So now that everybody's caught up, let's set the table on just the background. Like, you grew up in England, and could take us a little bit through that, your home life or school or what you were interested in. I mean, we don't have to do a super deep dive, but just a little. Yeah, you
certainly, you would not have guessed what I would end up doing from my childhood. My parents were both Methodist preachers.
Wow. See, that's what I'm looking for. That's awesome.
The first time I ever came to America was in 1984 when I was 16 years old, because my dad did a work exchange. He came and worked at the Foothills Methodist Church, which I think is in La Mesa. Wow. And I just remember being kind of blown away by the California lifestyle. So that was when we were living in Cambridge. We moved around England quite a bit because Dad's excuse was that he would run out of sermons after a certain number of years, so we had to move so he could recycle them. Anyway, for whatever reason, fairly peripatetic childhood. Went to Oxford, got a law degree. Yay! I was lucky. I peaked.
You're kind of sweeping that under the rug, and I understand some of the subtext there, but keep going.
Well, you know what? It makes you sound kind of privileged, but I should say that, and it certainly is a privilege to go to Oxford, but Mum and Dad did not have very much money. I was just fortunate that I got born at the right time to go through the British education system without it costing my parents anything.
It's amazing.
So
totally amazing.
And I was also very fortunate in that I peaked academically at just the right time to get into Oxford. It was all downhill after that. So I was supposedly doing a law degree at Oxford, but I tend to say that I did law, rowing and beer drinking, and not necessarily in that order. And in fact, it's probably the rowing and the beer drinking that have served me best in the longer term. Sorry, but obviously I'm not promoting irresponsible drinking.
No.
I just want to emphasise that.
Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows that.
So then
and drinking and rowing is totally safe.
I certainly didn't try it on the Pacific. Right. I ran a dry boat. I do want to emphasise that. Do not go rowing across oceans while drunk, because it could end really badly.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do after that. So like most people who don't have a clue, I became a management consultant. Whoops.
And you're... Yeah, no offense to any management consultants out there. And you're how old at this point? 22,
21.
24, 21. And
21 and clueless. I'm a management consultant, and I think I know from day one that I'm in the wrong place.
So something doesn't feel right.
Yeah, you know what? That trip to California, 5 years before that. And also growing up as a child of Thatcher, you know, the Thatcher-Reagan years, I really bought into that myth that having the good job and the big paycheck and the nice house and the cars and the everything else would make me happy. And so I gave it my best shot. Right. I really tried to fit into that world because that was my story. Having money and all the toys makes you happy. Right. However...
But at a very young age, I mean, some people, no names, some people, it could take 20, 30 plus years before they come to that realization. So I'm just, from the outside looking in, saying you're very in tune with how you're feeling. Something's not right. Something's incongruous there, and
yes.
Going.
Although it took me 11 years to actually do anything about it.
Well,
because I had these two things going on. Like money makes me happy, but I'm really miserable. So, what's going on there? Right. But it's funny, isn't it, how we get sort of enculturated into certain myths. And we think that we're the only person in the whole world that's going, this isn't working for me. And so you try to fit in because all your friends seem just fine with it. Everybody that you knows is in that same kind of work and living the same kind of a life. Yep. And so you're like, well, it must just be something wrong with me. So I'll just keep that little insistent voice really quiet. I'll keep squishing it down and hope that it goes away. Because this is what grown-ups are supposed to do. Right. We're supposed to get up at 6 a.m. and get on the commuter train and go work a 12-hour day and pay into our pension plans and all of those sensible grown-up things.
And then so you say 11 years, so you're 32-ish?
Yeah.
And something changes. And I'm going to say once again, very strangely, worth sharing, because a lot of the audience here knows this story. I was 35, and I think you know the story, so I didn't row across an ocean, but I signed up. It was very weird. It was this paddling event. So at 18, I'm like, someday I want to do that. It's paddle with your arms, stand up from Catalina to Manhattan Beach. Not a big deal. It's 32 miles, but
that's a pretty big deal.
At 18, I'm thinking, I really want to do this. Next thing you know, you wake up, you're 35. And the way I share the story is there's a lot of parallels here. I say I was depressed, even though I had a fairly successful company, and just things didn't feel right. And it's the most bizarre. So this Catalina Classic ends up leading to the Habit Factor book and app. And because the way to figure out how to paddle was tracking my habits and going through. So what I'm sharing here is I did a bucket list at 35. You had the same sort of like catalyst at 32. So what's happening there? At a point you're just like, enough is enough? Or?
Well, I knew I eventually had to admit to myself in the face of compelling evidence that I actually was extremely unhappy. I wasn't thriving in my career. Looking back now, I can see it's because it didn't mean anything to me. There was nothing in my work that really resonated with my values. Without wanting to sound too spiritual about it, but I will anyway. There was nothing in that work that fed my soul. And I can remember standing on the train platform on a cold winter's morning and it's dark and I just feel like my soul is dying. And there's suddenly this urgency, like I have to do something while I still have a soul to shrivel, before it dies completely. And so I started reading self-help and personal development books and Stephen Covey, bless him, and his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, habits.
Yes, yeah.
And one of his habits is begin with the end in mind. And so he suggests this exercise that you picture the ultimate end, your own funeral, and you're the one in the casket. And there are people talking about you and how you lived your life. And 2 versions. What do you want them to be saying? And what are they going to say if you carry on as you are?
Right.
And so I sat down one evening and I did this exercise and I wrote the fantasy version first, the one that I wanted them to be saying. And it was just like I'd opened a door into this parallel universe where I was living the life that I was supposed to be living. And my friends would be saying, I mean, apart from the fact that they were so sad and they missed me dreadfully, that they admired the way that I'd gone out and really lived life to the full. And I didn't always succeed, but even if I failed, I would pick myself up and dust myself off and try again. That I just got out there and lived the heck out of life and wasn't held back by fear and self-limiting beliefs and all of that stuff. And it felt so real. Like I could feel what it was like to be living that life.
That's so awesome.
And it was this amazing technicolor, vivid, vivacious life.
Right.
And then I had to write the version that I was actually heading for if I carried on as I was. And there was nothing wrong with it. it conformed to a lot of our culture's definitions of success. It was nice and sensible and comfortable and secure, if there is such a thing. And it was what I had thought I wanted, but I realized in that moment that actually it wasn't what I wanted at all. That having the big house and the 3-car garage actually was not what I wanted my legacy to be. Right. So I wish I could say that I went into the office the next day and immediately quit and strode out to live a life of adventure, but I didn't because I was terrified, because I didn't know anybody who was living that kind of a life. Or if I did, they were just in books or on TV. They weren't real people. They were sort of those people, you know, the brave people, the adventurers and explorers and all of those. They weren't people like me. Right. But there's a danger in a little knowledge, but from the little I know about sort of psychology and neuroscience, I feel like my subconscious, in that moment when I really emotionally engaged with that vision of my potential future, even though I couldn't see any way of bridging the gap from my present reality to that potential reality, it was like my subconscious had gone, hell yeah, that's the life we want to be living. And so over the coming years, there were a number of decisions, some deliberate, some more accidental. So I quit my job. My relationship ended. So I moved out of our house and ended up, it probably looked like a complete train wreck, actually, at this point. Because there I am, jobless, incomeless, homeless.
Chaos and confusion always precede order.
Yeah, but, you know, I didn't even feel confused. I mean, I didn't really know where I was going, but I felt so free. Right. And I think up until that point, I'd almost, it's going to sound very ungrateful maybe, but when you're good at jumping through society's hoops, when you're good at passing exams and getting a good job and, you know, attracting a successful mate and all of those things, you get the pat on the back. And that becomes quite addictive. And so for me to fail spectacularly at a few things and realize that actually it's okay, there are worse things. It was like, okay, so I've done these things that really scared me and the world's still turning. So now what can I do? It just opened up vast new horizons in my mind, of all the potential out there. And it was, okay, I'll speed over this.
No, it's really good. And that leads you to
Peru.
Okay, perfect.
I know that's not what you were going to say. I did go to Machu Picchu. I decided that I was going to travel. I'd never really backpacked before. Right. And as I'm here just sort of exploding all of my self-limiting beliefs. Well, by now, 34. Like 34. I've dabbled in a few other things. Sure. I've been a photographer. I've been a baker. It was 2003. So I'd be 35. Right. So after a 2-week crash course in Spanish, I head over to Peru and I'm going to write a book about my travels there, which is an approach that I do recommend when you're doing a very scary thing, especially involving travel, because often in travel, things go wrong. Maybe especially in South America. What? Like, how many more people can I offend in this podcast?
You're not. Listen, I just want to check in real quick. Your parents, what are they? Where are they? Have they disowned you? Are they just loving and totally supportive? Or they're just like, Roz has got to be Roz? And by the way, did you have any sibling, brothers, sisters?
I've got a younger sister. Okay. She's 17 months exactly younger than me.
That's fantastic. So what are your parents saying?
So actually, I want to circle back to that. Okay. Let me just briefly talk about Peru, and then the parents really come back into the frame. So 3.5 months traveling around Peru, and it is life-changing. Again, I'm doing something that scared me. And even when things go wrong, I'm like, well, this sucks, but it's going to make a great story for the book. So I think that that construct of being there to write a book enables me to be 1 degree detached from when things are going pear-shaped. And it was an incredible trip. It was like life just showed up and gave me the most incredible experiences. And all I had to do was keep my journals and keep a record of everything that was happening. There was laughter, there were tears, there was joy, there was bereavement,
And
there
you're
was
just running into like coincidentally or synchronistically
it was
right
magical.
person at the right time leading you where you needed to go or to see what you needed to see or who you needed to meet.
Yes. Now, I know that you're going to ask me a question later, but I'm sort of going to jump the gun and mention that one of the formative books that I read about that time was The Celestine Prophecy.
Oh, that's one of my
set in
favorites,
Peru.
and it's set in Peru, yes.
And so I was seeing the world through this lens of energy and synchronicity,
so
and it absolutely worked.
Yeah.
And I think that when you're experimenting with a new way of living, going to a different country, a very unfamiliar country, really, really helps because all the cards get thrown up in the air and
your senses, everything, because
you're hyper alive.
Yeah.
And especially in Peru, like the colours are so rich and there's so much everything there. It's an amazing place. Yes. And I was just so into all of that, just soaking it all up. Wow. It was very cool indeed. And while I'm there, one of the things that happens is like one of the most amazing things was I went on this pilgrimage from Cuzco up to, a glacier in the mountains outside of there. So we traveled through the night on a cattle truck and then we hiked and there were 30,000 pilgrims all in this valley, for the pilgrimage of Coyuriti and, crazy few days. I was one of maybe 10 white faces that I saw amongst 30,000, of the Peruvian Indians. So the indigenous people who were there before the Spaniards arrived. Just incredible. I was pretty confused because Spanish was not, but my Spanish was very sketchy. Also, their native language was Quechua, so they only had a little bit of Spanish. So we so they were trying to explain to me everything that was going on, but we were both very much operating in a far second language.
Awesome.
But
third language.
It helped to really surrender to. I have no idea what's going on, but it's all good.
Wow.
But something really significant, well, there are many significant things, but one that had ongoing significance particularly was they were telling me that every year when they go up to this glacier, they have to trek a bit further because the glacier is retreating. It's getting smaller and smaller. So this is 2003. This is before An Inconvenient Truth. And I can't even remember now whether I was aware of climate change. I think we sometimes forget from now we hear so much about it.
Right.
I don't think it was on a lot of people's radar back then. And so I was like, oh, what's happening here? So when I got back to England, once I'd written the first draft of my book,
what was it called?
The book's called 3 Peaks in Peru. It's actually never been published.
Okay.
Because there were 3 significant mountains that I went to.
I love it.
And also the 3 months that I was there, the story almost formed itself into these 3 peaks of ascending height of my experience there.
Three's a magic number.
It is, very much so. So it's actually still the book I'm most proud of, but as yet unpublished. So any publishers out there, just saying.
I have one quick question because I think if I'm a listener, every once in a while I try to imagine you said there was compelling evidence about things were failing or things were that you needed to change. So I'm going way back. Yeah. Just share, like, if it's not too personal, or maybe it is and you're willing to, but a few things that were compelling you to make this shift, to drive the obituary exercise or take the next step and be willing to be fired or quit the job or be willing to leave the relationship. Like, what was the evidence? Like, was it just your heart?
Deep unhappiness, plummeting self-esteem.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
A sense that there was a serious mismatch between who I was pretending to be on the outside and who I was on the inside, but not knowing who I was on the inside. And in fact, it was very sad to leave the relationship. But I knew that to find out who I was, it's this kind of, at the time I thought I was, I won't say unique, but none of my friends seemed to be having these doubts. But then I found out about this Jungian concept of individuation that often happens to people in their 30s or 40s, where they start asking those big existential questions of who am I? What am I here for? What is life all about? And I'd realized that life is all about having a big house was not working for me, that I needed something deeper. That this was a question that only I could answer, that I could read all the self-help books that I wanted, but ultimately there isn't a shortcut for doing the work. You and I have both written books where we're really trying to help people. And I've certainly learned a hell of a lot from reading books, but ultimately you still have to find your own answers because we are all different. And it really is this deeply personal work with a capital W that I think I don't want to say we all have to go through, but I certainly had to go through in order to find out who I was and how I could be happy.
But those are the telltale signs I was just looking for, because I think those are the things people may relate to, whether it's self-esteem or happiness or purposefulness, and all really good telltale signs, and then driving you towards this new direction. So.
I think the unhappiness is the first clue.
Yeah. Okay.
And for me that arose from the lack of congruence between what I was doing and who I thought I might be.
And then just trying to figure out who you really are.
Yes.
And figure out those values. So we talk, before we get into the next part, whether it's in the course, in the book, just going through those values exercises is so critical.
It really is.
And even going back to the obituary exercise, did you hear that kind of is rooted in Alfred Nobel? Have you heard that story?
I have heard that story, The Merchant of Death.
Yes. He's dead. The Merchant of Death is dead. And he is reading that thinking, this is how I'm going to be remembered?
Because his brother had died and they published in the newspaper the wrong obituary.
Right.
Yeah. So I only heard about that subsequently. So that's why he founded the Nobel Peace Prize, was so that he would not be remembered as the Merchant of Death.
All right, a quick timeout. Again, thank you so much for joining me in Habits to Goals. I hope you are digging this interview. I want to share with you something pretty cool we've just thrown out there. You can catch this either live or recorded. It's a webinar I put on. It's about 60 minutes. It goes through 9 major tips. It gives you background about the habit factor, a little bit about me, and an overview and intro to something we have put together called the 28-Day Breakthrough. Fantastic course. Really, the goal of which is, it's the old, you don't feed a man a fish or woman, you teach them to fish. And so this is built above, beneath, around the habit factor, really gets in depth with mission, vision, values, some great modules around goals in particular, energy, the mastery mindset. Those are modules that are included. Anyways, check it out. All you have to do is go to thehabitfactor.com/28. That's the number 28 day, D-A-Y, webinar. That's thehabitfactor.com/28-day webinar. You can get the info, sign up, and hopefully we'll see you on the inside. And with that, let's get back to this fantastic interview. Cheers.
I think that, so the way I understand the story, he had invented dynamite because miners before that were using gelignite, which was very unstable, and there were a lot of accidental explosions and a lot of miners being killed and maimed. So actually his intentions in inventing dynamite were good. But then, of course, humans being humans, we managed to take a good technology and turn it into something evil. And so that was how, dynamite ended up being used in warfare and for all kinds of unpleasant purposes. So I don't know if it's really that he changed who he was or his intentions. Maybe he just wanted to rehabilitate his public image.
Well, the reason I dragged it back to the forefront is it's this other theme that I want to remind the listeners. I anchor a lot of ideas on quotes that I love.
Yeah.
And the idea is you cannot change, this is the quote, your destination overnight, but you can change your direction. And so that's what he did, and that's what you did. Immediately change your direction. So go on. So you're in Peru
right.
and you're working your way out of there.
Well, just briefly to pick up on the direction, that obituary exercise that I did, even though the change externally was not immediately obvious, I then had a very powerful vision of where I wanted to end up, like right at the end of my life or a few days later. And I am an absolute believer, and I'll come back to this if I remember, with the rowing stories as well. I think it's so important, especially when we're looking at making big, scary changes in our lives, to have a very clear vision of the what and the why. Like, what do I want to achieve by the end of my life, and why does that matter to me? And if we don't know the answers to that, I absolutely think this is the most important work that we can ever do. Right. Because coming back to the course adjustments, right. I've taken a few like juddering turns in my life, which is not, it worked for me. Might be a bit traumatic for some people. So it doesn't have to be quite as dramatic as that. You don't have to do as I did, which was leap out of the aeroplane and then start making my parachute. I think there are like ways to let yourself out of the plane a bit more gradually, or, have made your parachute before you take the leap. But one way and another, I've ended up in a good place. Sure. With, a working parachute. So that's all good.
Yeah, and I'm going to hit you with another quote then. So the idea is we don't have to see the entire staircase, just the next step.
Oh, that's becoming increasingly true for me as I get older, actually. Okay. I still think it's important to have a vision, but also I sometimes call it the bifocal approach, which is I want to know where the destination is, and I will focus on what I need to do right now, today, to get one step closer to that. But I can't possibly know everything that's going to happen in between. And I'd probably go into complete meltdown if I did try to process all of that.
And there's so much to get into. And I know I promised you it would be a certain amount of time. So having said that, take me back to Peru.
And the environmental awakening.
Yes.
So the two things that, I came back from Peru with many things, but with regards to the environment, one was this memory of the retreating glaciers, and the other one was that indigenous respect for Pachamama, as they call Mother Nature in South America. But I think in the UK, and I think in the US, we tend to think of Mother Nature as being this very benign, forgiving, nurturing kind of an entity, whereas Pachamama, she gets mad. And if you disrespect her, you're going to suffer for it. Sure. Earthquakes and tsunamis and, bad stuff. So, volcanoes. And so when I got back to England, I did my research. I started finding out about all our environmental challenges, and I got so fired up. I was kind of like, my hair was on fire. I was like, I have to do something. I was almost hyperventilating, going, but this is terrible. And how come I didn't know about this? And then I looked around and I thought, well, from the way they're behaving, it seems like a lot of other people don't know about this stuff either. And so I desperately wanted to do something. But I was still just, recovering management consultant and wannabe writer.
I love that.
And so that wasn't a very compelling platform. And then I happened to make friends with this guy via the Royal Geographical Society in London. Make friends with this guy who had rowed across the Atlantic with, of all people, his mother.
Oh my! OMG!
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 And at the time, actually, this is terribly disrespectful, but I thought, how hard can it be if someone's mum can row across an ocean? I know how to row. Actually, funnily enough, she was the age I am now when they did that voyage.
Time.
And so I will say, though, it didn't immediately strike me as something I wanted to do.
Sure.
Dan,
I can understand.
He told me about how every sunset they'd have gin and tonics, and that bit, oh dear, we're back to alcohol again, aren't we? That bit I thought I could do, but the rest of it sounded quite miserable to me. But I think it just lodged somewhere. So a few months later, I'm still trying to figure out, like, I'm asking these big questions. How can I support this environmental cause? And this is where my parents sort of come back into it, because summer of 2004, my dad had a stroke, and at the age of 75. And it was around that time, as I was driving from the south to the north of England. I'd already been up there once or twice to see him, but I'm driving back up, and like a long drive, and you know how your brain just sort of goes into like alpha waves. Yeah, it's like the chattering brain subsides for a little while, and the subconscious can get a word in edgeways, and
get sparks of insight,
light bulb over the head moment. Yes,
talk to me.
I will row across oceans to raise environmental awareness. Yay!
Here, better.
There we
go.
Was better.
That's a high five over the mic.
Yes.
Probably didn't sound good on the mic, but that's all right.
And
so that came on a drive.
It did.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's such good thinking time, isn't it, when you're on a long journey?
So my quick theory on this is that if some people believe in this idea of superconscious, and so the conduit to that, I believe, is the subconscious. And so that's why when you're brushing your teeth, you're doing something habitual. Yeah. You go into subconscious mode, and then you're like, oh, I can invest here, or I can do this. The point is, the spark of insight comes when you're in subconscious mode. So Edison took a nap. Einstein, I don't know what he did, rode his bike. You
played his violin. I think he played his violin. Yeah.
And that's the habituation that leads to subconscious, which is the link of insight.
Yeah. And I think we can deliberately, once we're aware of that process, we can use it. Like, we can take a nap. If I could play the violin, I would. But, you know, we couldn't step away from the problem. Sure. In fact, God, we really are going into all my bad habits here as well. But I used to smoke, and I would have so many good ideas while I had to step outside for my 10-minute cigarette break. And of course, I'm breathing, you know, it's my...
That's crazy that you smoke, but I can see that as a recovering management consultant. Got it.
Well, you know, it was London in the early 90s. Believe me, I was not the only smoker in my circle.
I know you weren't.
I haven't had a cigarette since 2004.
That's the spark of insight, and then let's get into your first voyage. Is probably,
actually, can I just say a little bit more about that, because I think there's something important
we're on your time frame.
There's something important that has to happen after the light bulb moment.
Action.
Because, you know, that is the call to adventure in, like, the hero's journey. And to emphasize that, I'm not saying I'm a hero. I'm not saying you have to be heroic to have a hero's journey, because the sort of archetypal story is there is the call to adventure. And at first the hero goes, no. Yeah. I think you got the wrong guy. I think you meant to go next door, because that's not me. No, that's not really my thing.
Rejection.
Yeah. And so after the light bulb moment, immediate thought was, that's perfect. Second thought was, that's insane. Like, I've spent, I think, 4 days sailing in my life. I don't know the ocean. I know nothing about this. I've never had a big adventure. I'm not that kind of person. Like, all of these reasons and excuses and get out clauses why. That's not my job. So I spent a week sort of battling backwards and forwards. And I used to say, and of course, like in this battle between the head and the heart, or the conscious and the subconscious or whatever, I said, inevitably the heart won. And then someone went to me, they said, that's not inevitable at all. So a lot of people have this battle between the head and the heart, the conscious and subconscious. And often it's the sensible grown-up voice going, don't be silly. You know it's a terribly bad idea.
That's right.
You'll only regret it.
That's right.
And so often we give in to that one.
Correct.
Because the other ones, Steve Jobs quote about the crazy ones.
That's right. Yeah.
But I suppose I had done so much work by that point on, all of these exercises, and I've been hanging out with very cool friends like my mentors. And I realized that if I didn't answer this call, then I would be betraying all of that work that I'd done, all of the progress that I'd made. And I just couldn't do that to myself.
Who did you tell while you were still unsure?
I didn't tell anybody while I was unsure.
And then even when
because then they start coming up with all reasons.
Sure, who did you tell?
Well, I told my mum.
Okay, that's about it.
That was the commitment. But just put yourself in my poor mum's shoes for a moment. So there she is. Her husband's in hospital, having had a severe stroke.
And her daughter wants to go die in the middle of the Atlantic.
Exactly. So mum just kind of went, nice weather we've been having recently. Completely changed the subject. And, of course she was overwhelmed. Right. About 3 weeks later, my father died. As deaths go, I'm glad he didn't have a long and protracted illness.
Right.
So I did tell him about my intention, but he wasn't really functioning all that well by then. Actually, my sister, much more directly as a result of my father's death, decided at that time that life was short and that she was going to go travel around the world for 12 months.
You inspired her.
No. Yes. Do not suggest that to my little sister.
I know. But
she entirely made up her own mind. And I do want to say that she has gone on to do the Pacific Crest Trail, many other like the Camino de Santiago, and this year she's
chip off the old block.
Don't say that about my little sister. She is her own person.
We're not going to let her know about this. We all have little siblings that have the same challenges.
Maybe I'm a chip off her block.
Right,
anyway, let's say we're both chips off my mum's block because mum definitely has the adventure gene.
I love it.
Yeah.
So,
and my sister's doing the Continental Divide Trail this summer. So if you're anywhere in Colorado, New Mexico,
maybe somewhere along the Continental Divide, somewhere
between there and Montana, Wyoming. I've missed out a state somewhere.
Love it.
Apologies to people in the state I've missed out. So I was committed, and 14 hectic, crazy months later, I set out on my first ocean.
And obviously we'll do this again. We don't have time for there's ton of preparation, ton of research. You're reading, you're studying, you're talking to people who
lots
know
of courses,
do this.
Lots of conversations.
But then you set out.
Yes.
And it's just you and you, right? I mean, you have radio communication, some form of cellular contact.
I have a satellite phone.
Phone. That's what I was thinking.
Yes. And for most of that voyage. It didn't work for the last 24 days.
Well, that's where I was going to go. So what was the longest period where you're talking to nobody? 24 days?
24 days of not speaking to anybody at all other than myself and the ocean. But the longest that I've been without seeing another person is 5 months.
5 months?
Yeah, that was the Indian Ocean.
And so I am fascinated by that solitary confinement.
With hard labor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that.
I would love to. I think it's a real privilege to have had that time to quite literally step off the earth. And I've probably done more self-reflection than is quite healthy. Although, actually, I say that a bit glibly. I think that inner work that we do is incredibly important. And especially that first voyage when I did have a stereo on board, but for the first month I couldn't use it because everything on my boat was solar powered and there wasn't enough sunshine to power anything other than the essentials, which the water maker, the GPS and the satellite phone. Then about 2 days after the sun came out, the stereo stopped working. So after 3.5 months on that crossing, I had music for 2 days. The rest of the time, I was literally alone with my own thoughts. And
it's fantastic.
At the time, it was brutal.
Scary.
Absolutely brutal.
Right.
I went into some dark places.
So talk about that, doubts and
a lot of doubt.
Talk about the dark place, but the doubt. I mean, like, how are you talking yourself through the doubts?
Different days, I had different motivations. Sometimes it was, I really want to find out what I'm capable of. Other days it was, I really want to support the environmental mission. Other days it was, I really, really don't want to go back to the office. It was just whatever it took.
Whatever it took. So I love that. And you had changing motivations from one day to the next.
Just whatever inspired me on that particular day.
No, that's great.
I needed about 1,000 different reasons
Coping
why.
mechanisms.
And
then you're telling yourself, I'm guessing things like, just another, I mean, when it gets really, really bad, like just another hour, just another day, one day at a time.
Sometimes it'd be just take another 10 oar strokes, because I would get so frustrated and so bored.
Right.
Like, it was a lot of boredom interspersed with brief periods of terror. But you just get so, like, I'm so sick of myself. And you just want to, like, throw down the oars and, go to sleep, just get away from your own head for a bit. But I found that you don't get across an ocean any faster if you keep wimping out on your rowing shifts. So as time went on, I got much, much better at sticking to my disciplined routine. Awesome. And I found that when I was having a real slump of a moment, if I could just do 10 more oar strokes, which takes about 30 seconds, awesome, then I would often it was enough to get me out of that real crisis moment of, I can't stand this a moment longer.
But what a great parallel for just like all of us in the day-to-day when and obviously we're not in the middle of an ocean and we're not going through that hardship, but the point is just another 10 strokes or just another 30 seconds or just another hour. It's not as bad necessarily as it might seem. Like what stories are we creating?
I just want to take a little diversion into a conversation that I had with a channel swimmer, like a long distance swimmer. So, he's doing, 20 or 30 miles on a swim. And he said that the reason that a lot of long distance swimmers fail is not because they've reached their limit of exhaustion, but because they reach a point where they become afraid of the moment of exhaustion. They feel tired and they're like, oh my God, if I'm feeling this tired after 10 miles, how am I going to feel after 15?
That's right.
And so they psych themselves out.
It's a negative projection.
Yeah, before they're actually physically exhausted. But it's the expectation of exhaustion that does for them.
And taking that inventory on a moment-by-moment basis. I mean, so talk about what were you doing for nutrition and then sleep. How much sleep were you getting?
It really varied. I don't know exactly. I would do 4 shifts of 3 hours of rowing with an hour off in between. So that takes 15 hours out of the day. Right. So then I've got 9 hours left for like evening meal, bathe, brush teeth, write blog, upload blog,
that's awesome.
Talk to mum and sleep as best I can. But the boat's constantly tipping around and I'm a light sleeper anyway, but you also sort of want to be a light sleeper on the ocean in case, there's a storm blowing up or there's a container ship coming along or whatever. But you're just really happy not to be rowing. So I was happy just like to be off my backside and,
And your hands got destroyed, I'm guessing.
I wore gloves. So I got awesome calluses, but the point of wearing the gloves was not to get open blisters because those would get quite infected. For food, I had freeze-dried meals. Snack bars, nuts, dried fruit, grew my own bean sprouts on board. As time went on with the later voyages, I got much more sort of refined. I had raw food crackers that I would make on dry land and take with me. I had nut butters and
Great.
oatmeal, and I would add powdered coconut milk to practically everything. I mean, it's just such yummy stuff and very high in calories.
Right.
And yeah, even in like a chili con carne. I mean, you could put it in anything. So I actually, with the subsequent voyages, the two big bribes that I used to get myself back out there again, because, you know, it's hard doing this stuff. Even on a good day, it's hard. Especially, this will make you laugh, I don't particularly like exercise. Like, I'm really just not that into it.
Well, that's inspiring for many, many listeners, I'm sure.
I have not darkened the door of a gym for 6 years now.
Has any other woman done what you have done?
No, not yet.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean,
there was some Turkish dude got there the year before I did,
but your accomplishment is truly unparalleled. I mean, it's amazing. So
it sometimes amazes me, actually. It is definitely a triumph, a triumph of motivation over inclination.
So you're saying somehow you've motivated yourself to go back out for a second and a third row with a W.
Even more than that, because the Pacific, I did in 3 stages over the course of 3 years. Right. So each of those was really an expedition in itself. I had to do work on the boat and restock in between each voyage. So just the logistics of it, like the, sorting out, getting boat repair equipment to the Republic of Kiribati in the middle of the Pacific, I just...
Yeah, I mean, planning and preparing and practicing, the 3 Ps, plan, prepare, practice. It's just amazing.
But you prepare like your life depends on it, because it does,
Yeah, wow. All right, well, we could keep going. I know, we're kind of up against it. I want to hit some of my typical, you know what? It's one of my standard questions, so I'll back it up and work our way to our close, since we are rounding third base here. So this is the question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you battle through tough days?
Well, the glib answer is it's very difficult to quit in the middle of an ocean.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You can come up on the deck and go, I've had enough. Like, I've had it up to here. I'm done.
That's so great. I love that. There's no quitting.
There is no quitting. Yeah. So you just have to hang on in there and find a way to be with yourself for that long. Something I really want to say about that is, if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, I would be such a different person. Certainly from the inside, I feel like night and day. And one of the things that I used to believe that I now know is completely wrong. I used to believe that you had to have courage before you did something like this. You had to have perseverance before you did something like this. You had to have all of these like gritty qualities before you could have a big adventure. And that's completely the wrong way round. You get these things by taking the action, by having the adventure, and that unleashes all of these things that you have inside. You don't get courageous by sitting on the couch eating chocolate chip cookies. You have to get out there and test yourself.
I am so in love with that comment, because I write over and over and over about habit, and my point is grit is a habit.
Yeah.
And courage and all these things, these are traits that grow stronger with use, just like a muscle. And so taking that first step is in many ways the hardest thing to do.
It is. And that's when you need the motivation. Yeah. So I needed that catalyst of my environmental awakening.
That's right.
To give me the motivation to actually start taking the action, which then called forth out all of these things that I didn't even know I had until I got onto the ocean.
So I have a course called the 28-Day Breakthrough, and the foundation is built with purpose and values and all these things, getting the foundation squared away.
The reasons why. Yeah.
So the next question is, how do you, Roz Savage, define success? It's a moving target maybe, and a lot of people have different answers.
For me,
I found.
Yeah, for me, I would say, I could go on about this a lot, but I think at its essence, it's inner peace. It's knowing that I am doing what I'm here to do, that congruence
Yep.
between who I am and what I'm doing. So I don't even particularly have to, paradoxically, succeed in that kind of success. It's just knowing that I showed up and I did my best.
I love it. Purposefulness. This is called the Habits to Goals podcast. So I'm wondering if you could share maybe your 3 best habits as you see them, and maybe one that you're trying to change or modify. But we'll start with the good ones first.
Journaling.
Awesome.
I've been journaling, well, on and off since I was 8. I took a break from about 18 to 32. But from 32 to 50. I don't journal every day, but I notice that I feel a lot better if I do. And if I haven't journaled for about a week, then I'm pretty much a pain to be around. For me, it's partly a record of what's going on, but it's much more a sense-making exercise.
Right.
And weaving together stuff that's happening on the outside, thoughts I'm having from the inside, spiritual learnings, just really, a lot of it is about self-definition. And who am I? How am I showing up? How am I spending my time? And also, incidentally, if you think you don't have time to journal, you'll probably find that if you do make an hour or 2 a week to journal, you'll find that a lot of the stuff you're spending your time on, you don't actually need to be doing because it's not taking you towards your goals.
It gives you clarity.
It does.
I mean, I don't do it hardly as much as I want to, but when I do it, I feel so much more clear.
I love it. And I find it important to do it by hand. I have these beautiful notebooks that look like old leather. They're not, but they look that way. And a nice gel tip pen. And so just the process of forming the letters, I think it does something in my brain.
That's great.
That feels very good and very relaxing. And I love it. So that's my number one habit. In the mornings, I have a nice little session of stretching and meditating. Yay. That just gets the day off to a really good start. Don't manage it 100%, but again, I know that I feel a lot better when I do. And meditation means many different things to different people. To me, it's just going as quiet and still and as relaxed as I can to try and be that empty vessel, to discipline my mind to shut the hell up for a few minutes and allow something else to come through.
To come in.
Yeah, because I feel that the best things that I've done have been when I surrender to what I'm being called to do.
It's beautiful.
I'm running out of good habits here.
Well, those are great. Those are fantastic.
I will also say I've just started blogging again after about 8 months off. And I do really enjoy it again as a, for me, it's sort of an accountability process, even if nobody reads my blog post.
And
although, folks, they are really good.
Everybody reads your blog.
It makes me feel that I need to have something good to report on a weekly basis.
That's fantastic.
So those are really important. Oh, and my 10,000 steps a day. I'm sitting here with my Fitbit on. Well, because I don't go to the gym, but I love walking. I find walking also good for the brain. Yeah.
Walking's amazing.
And walking and talking, like it's a new way to have a meeting. It's really good.
Yep.
So those are my good habits. What would I like to, do I really want to go here?
You don't have to. I always leave it optional, but it's entertaining. You do not have to. In the interest of time, we can keep moving.
Well, a lot of my friends are giving up alcohol, which I fully commend and support and applaud.
Right.
I'm just not willing to go there.
Right.
But I have quite a number of friends who are sort of energy workers in various ways, and so it's very important to them to be a really super clear channel.
I feel like we're in the same place. So what I started doing is having certain days that are on-off days.
Yeah.
Rather than, because I believe in moderation. All right, well, that's fantastic. Transformative books. You mentioned the Celestine Prophecy earlier.
Yeah.
Is there anything else worth talking about? We're almost finished here.
Environmentally, I loved Ishmael.
Okay.
Again, it's a novel that puts across some very important concepts. It's really about how humans are abusing the earth, and how we sort of fight this impossible race against hunger. But as soon as we figure out ways to grow more food, we just produce more people. So we never actually win that race. It really changed the way that I saw the relationship between humans and nature, that we are part of nature.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we seem to be living out this narrative that we're separate from nature, that it's there purely to serve us. But that's a very dangerous story, because we live in the ultimate closed loop system of planet Earth, and we're kind of becoming victims of our own success. Like, we've been wildly successful,
I think we're the ultimate victims. The irony with the save the earth is the earth
is fine.
Fine.
Yes,
that's what.
Absolutely agree with that.
Just going to shake
it's
us
the
off
humans,
like a bad disease.
It's the humans I worry about. And although I have days when I'm not that keen on humans,
right.
Even so, most of my best friends are humans, and I'd like to see us be around for a while
yet.
Be
nice.
I'd also just like to mention conversations with God was. Even though I, having been brought up by two Methodist preachers, I went through a real stage of
That's awesome.
Not being into the G word. But the phrase in that rocked my world was that we have, I'm paraphrasing here, we have a duty to be the grandest version of the greatest vision that we ever had of ourselves. Not in a self-aggrandizing way, but to raise the average level of consciousness. So when we raise ourselves up, we raise everybody up.
Yeah.
So actually, it's the most generous thing that we can do in the world is to be our best selves.
To be your best self. Wow.
But that phrase gave me permission to really dream big. I don't think I would have had the audacity to even think about rowing across the oceans if it weren't for that concept of the grandest version of the greatest vision.
And I love that take, because it's not about you, it's about others.
Absolutely. It's about us.
Right.
Yeah, and not just
high five. Oh.
Not just that was the best one yet.
Yeah, that was amazing. Well, with practice, we're gonna get better. Okay, any other book before we move on?
No, I like threes. I think we've done three now.
So a website, tech tool, gadget, app, anything that you just, besides the phone itself, that you can't live without.
Well, obviously, I love my GPS.
Oh, yeah.
Because you'll also laugh at this, but I have the world's worst sense of direction. So,
that is so funny.
I have my lovely little Irish man in my phone that tells me where to go. Evernote, I use a lot. Also, Evernote. On the software, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be meeting the developers in Mexico of some up-and-coming software called the New Map, N-O-O, Map.
Okay.
If you go to newmap.info, and there...
N-O-O?
Yeah, as in...
N-O-O?
Yes, New Map. And it's like the noosphere, which the noosphere is like the collective consciousness.
Got it.
And so they're developing this incredibly gorgeous software to... The concept is to enable us to connect with each other almost like neurons reaching out dendrites. I hope I'm getting my...
I love that.
My neuroscience terminology, so that we can connect much more seamlessly around concepts and ideas to kind of map global consciousness through technology.
That I want to see.
Me too.
Roz, you have been absolutely brilliant.
I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
You've enjoyed it as much as I have. I'm so glad I have persisted, and I'm also glad you happened to mention you were in the area. Which
Me
is
too.
Out of the blue.
I know.
The other thing I forgot to bring up in the open, ladies and gentlemen listening, is Roz wrote the foreword of The Habit Factor, because the app came out first. Even though I started the book, I did the app, and I came back, and I'm like, this superhero woman, if she would please write this forward. I had to beg her again, and she was kind enough to do that. So thank you so much for writing the forward. it's people talk to me all the time about it, honestly. And then they learn about you. So hopefully it's been good for both of us, but fantastic forward.
It's what it's all about, a win-win.
Yeah.
But it was just something that I believe in so much that, I'm sure you say this in the book, that we tend to overestimate how much we can achieve in a day. I know I always do. And underestimate how much we can achieve by consistent effort over time.
Yes.
And my 5 million oar strokes across 3 oceans are kind of the epitome of that.
5 million freaking oar strokes. All right, finally, I'd love to ask if there's anything we can promote, any website we can direct people to. This may not even air for another month or so because I'm queuing up some of my interviews and I like to sprinkle them because they're so good. But so I'm just saying that from a timeliness. Like if you had an event tomorrow, probably not good to mention it, but a website where they can find out more.
Well, I would love to stay in touch if anything about what I've said today has resonated with you. I will. I'm also. It's a bit too early to talk about it, but sneak preview. I am in the midst of devising a global women's network.
There's so many women that listen to the show. It's crazy. I'm serious.
Well, it's, I don't want to leave the boys out, but I think that we do need a rebalancing of the masculine and feminine energies in the world. And I would like at some point in the future for this to be everybody. But for now, I think we need to have a safe space to promote women, just to bring us up to equality. And this is not anti-men at all. This is not Me Too. This is what's going to come after Me Too when there's been this venting. It's to fill that vacuum then. Once we've said what we don't want, is to say, what do we want? What is our vision of the future where masculine and feminine are in balance, not just in the world as a whole, but in each of us individually?
So when you say, is it business women? Is it just women in general? Is it a certain age group? I'm just trying to narrow, if necessary, may not.
Women from 16 to 600.
Wow.
I hope that'll cover it. And
600, they slow up a lot.
They do a bit. And I know there's a lot of networks out there for business women. There's also a lot at the more spiritual end. We're sort of all of that, but mostly occupying the middle ground. This is not just about business networking. This is really for women who are interested in creating a better future. And so if you want to hear more about that, yes, I better give you my website address.
Yes,
it's www.roz, R-O-Z if you're British, or Z if you're American. And I'm not quite sure about the rest of the world, but we don't have time to go through 198 countries. RozSavage.com.
SAVAGE.
Just like it sounds. .com.
Roz, once again, absolutely brilliant. I could do this for another 3 hours with a beer or something.
One of these days we will.
Yeah, we'll get you back in the studio. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Today's episode is brought to you by Audible.com. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from. If there's one thing I know, and I think Jim Rohn was the one who said this originally, in 5 years, the difference in your life will be largely based upon 2 things: the books you've read and the relationships you have fostered. Doesn't it make sense to take advantage of the downtime, whether you're on the road, on a run, in the gym, kill a couple birds with one stone, get a book going? It's phenomenal. The more people I turn on to it, the more compliments I get. Not that I've actually done anything. 180,000 titles to choose from. You get 1 free book a month, 30% off any other book. Again, check it out. audibletrial.com/habits to goals. I'm going to say that again real quick. audibletrial.com/habits to goals. And that is the number 2. And of course, When you support our sponsors, you are supporting the show. So thank you again. I am extremely grateful. We'll see you at the next episode.